Top 7 Habits of People Who Seem to Have It All Figured Out. You have met someone like this. They are not louder than everyone else. They are not richer or more talented or luckier in any obvious way. But there is something settled about them. A quiet sense that they know what they are doing, even when things go wrong. While everyone else is scrambling, they seem to already know the next move. It is tempting to think this is a personality trait, something you either have or do not. But research into how these people actually operate suggests something different. It is not a trait. It is a small set of habits practiced consistently that compound over time into something that looks, from the outside, like having it all figured out. These are the 7 habits of people who seem to have it all figured out, and how each one actually works. Number 7. They decide in advance. Most people make decisions in the moment they need to be made. People who seem to have things figured out make many of their decisions before the moment ever arrives. They decide ahead of time what they will and will not do in a given situation, so that when the situation happens, there is no negotiation with themselves, no willpower required, no internal debate. The decision is already made. All that is left is execution. This concept has a name in behavioral psychology: implementation intentions, developed extensively through research by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer. Gollwitzer's studies, published across dozens of peer-reviewed papers since the 1990s, found that people who form specific if-then plans, such as deciding in advance exactly when, where, and how they will act, are significantly more likely to follow through than people who simply intend to do something. The person who seems to have it figured out is usually not exercising more willpower than you. They have simply removed the moment where willpower would be required. They decided last week. Today they are just following the plan. Number 6. They ask before they assume. When something goes wrong, most people's first instinct is to construct a story. They assume the email was rude on purpose. They assume the friend who did not call meant something by it. They assume the silence in a meeting was judgment. People who seem to have things figured out have trained themselves out of this instinct, or at least slowed it down enough to question it. This relates to what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, first described by social psychologist Lee Ross in 1977. It is the tendency to explain other people's behavior through their character, while explaining our own behavior through circumstances. When someone else is late, we assume they are careless. When we are late, we cite traffic. People who seem settled tend to ask a simple question before reacting. What else could explain this? Not as a way of avoiding accountability for others, but as a way of avoiding the unnecessary emotional cost of a story that might not even be true. Most conflict, most resentment, most wasted energy comes from acting on an assumption that was never actually confirmed. Number 5. They protect their mornings. The first hour of the day, for many of these people, is treated as something closer to sacred than convenient. Not because mornings are magic, but because the first hour of the day is the only part of it that has not yet been claimed by anyone else's demands. Once the phone is checked, once the inbox is open, the day belongs to other people's priorities. Before that happens, it still belongs to you. Research on willpower and decision fatigue, including work by psychologist Roy Baumeister, has found that self-control is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day. Decisions made early in the day, when willpower reserves are highest, tend to be more aligned with long-term goals than decisions made later, when willpower has been spent on dozens of smaller demands. People who seem to have things figured out are not necessarily morning people by nature. Many of them simply understood at some point that the first available hour is the most valuable hour and protected it accordingly before the rest of the world had a chance to claim it. Number 4. They let small things go. Most people treat every minor frustration as worth a reaction. A slow driver, a retardement, a delayed response. Each one gets noticed, processed, and often carried forward into the rest of the day. People who seem settled have developed a kind of triage system, usually without naming it as such. They ask almost instantly, does this actually matter? And if the honest answer is no, they let it go, not through suppression, but through genuine recalibration of its importance. This connects to research on emotional regulation by psychologist James Gross, who has documented that the way people interpret an event, not the event itself, determines most of their emotional response. Two people can experience the identical frustrating situation. One experiences it as a minor inconvenience. The other experiences it as a personal affront. The difference is almost entirely in the interpretation, not the event. The person who seems unbothered by small things is usually not suppressing a reaction. They have simply trained themselves to ask whether the reaction is proportional to the event, and most of the time it is not. Number 3. They say no without over-explaining. Most people, when declining something, feel compelled to justify the decision extensively. They apologize. They offer excuses. They reassure the other person that it is not personal, even when a simple no would have been sufficient. People who seem to have things figured out tend to decline more simply. Not rudely, just directly. They have learned that an over-explained no often invites negotiation, while a calm, brief no does not. Research on assertiveness, including work compiled by psychologists studying interpersonal boundaries, has consistently found that over-justifying a refusal tends to weaken it. The additional explanation creates more surface area for the other person to push back against, and it signals, even unintentionally, that the decision is unstable and open to negotiation. People who seem settled are not colder than everyone else. They have simply learned that a clear boundary, stated once calmly, is kinder in the long run than an over-explained one that gets eroded over time. Number 2. They separate the problem from the identity. When something goes wrong, most people's internal language quietly shifts from describing the situation to describing themselves. A failed project becomes evidence that they are a failure. A rejected idea becomes evidence that they are not creative. The problem and the person merge into one thing. People who seem to have things figured out maintain a clear separation between what happened and who they are. This distinction is central to the research of psychologist Carol Dweck on growth mindset, which found that people who interpret setbacks as information about a situation, rather than as verdicts about their identity, recover faster, take more productive risks, and learn more effectively from failure. The language difference is subtle but significant. I failed at this task versus I am a failure. The person who seems unshaken by setbacks is usually not immune to disappointment. They have simply learned to keep the disappointment contained to the event itself, rather than letting it expand into a conclusion about their fundamental worth. Number 1. They do the hard conversation early. Most people delay difficult conversations. The conflict that needs addressing. The expectation that needs clarifying. The feedback that needs to be given. It feels easier to wait, to hope the issue resolves itself, to avoid the discomfort of the moment. It almost never resolves itself. It usually compounds. People who seem to have things figured out have learned, often through painful experience, that difficult conversations get harder the longer they are delayed, not easier. The version of the conversation you have in week 1 is almost always less complicated than the version you would have to have in month 3, after resentment has had time to build on both sides. Organizational psychologists studying conflict resolution have consistently found that delayed conflict tends to escalate rather than dissolve, as both parties construct increasingly negative narratives about the other person's intentions during the silence. The longer the gap between the problem and the conversation, the more both sides fill that gap with assumptions, usually unflattering ones. The person who seems calm under pressure is often someone who simply chose discomfort early, deliberately, instead of discomfort later, compounded. It is not a more comfortable habit. It is simply a less expensive one. None of these 7 habits require unusual talent, unusual luck, or an unusual personality. They require deciding in advance, questioning your assumptions, protecting your first hour, letting small things go, declining simply, separating the problem from yourself, and having the hard conversation early. They are habits, which means they are available to anyone willing to practice them. That is the part nobody tells you. The people who look like they have it figured out are not fundamentally different from you. They just started practicing earlier. And that's the end of today's countdown. Some memories make us laugh, some make us think, and some remind us how much the world has changed. If this video brought back a memory, share it with someone who would understand. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.